Hello and welcome to the Broken Sword. Today we are looking at the original Dark Lord, Melkor.
Build me a throne worthy of Mordor.
Melkor, also known as Morgoth, was one of the almighty divine spirits. These divine spirits were among the first creations in Tolkien's own world, all created by Eru Ilúvatar. This means these divine spirits, also known as the Ainur, were created before even time itself had started. Of these, we know the names of the 15 most powerful spirits, later known as the Valar. These were the ones behind the shaping and ruling of the created world, and there were 7 lords, 7 queens, and 1 other. The 7 lords were Manwë, king of the Valar; Ulmo, king of the sea; Aule, the smith; Orome, the great rider; Mandos, judge of the dead; Lórien, master of dreams and desires; and Tolkas, champion of Valinor. And then we have the 7 queens of Varda, queen of the Valar; Yavanna, the queen of earth; Nienna, the lady of mercy; Este, the gentle; Vere, the weaver; Varna, the ever young; and Nessa, the dancer. These 14 followed the ways of Eru and were great followers of him. However, like in most stories, there was one other, the one that we are here to focus on today, Melkor. So you are probably wondering here, why is a Melkor even on this list? Why is he not amongst his fellow spirits? What makes him different? Well, let's jump into it, and to understand this a little better, we first need to understand Eru's thoughts when creating. As when Eru created these Valar, he did so while giving each of his creations just a glimpse into his thoughts and ideas. And therefore, each of the Valar end up as basically specialists in different areas, aspects, and thoughts of Eru. However, one of these is not like the others. One was not created equal, and that is Melkor. Melkor was created with a greater level of power and knowledge than those around him, meaning, at this point, there is only one being, one entity who is more powerful than him, and that is of course Eru itself. So, although in theory the other Valar may be slightly more powerful in one certain degree, for example, Tolkas had the ability to be able to just about physically overpower him, as a whole, none can come close to matching him. This extra knowledge led Melkor on a slightly different path straight away, for Melkor had knowledge of this thing in Tolkien's world called the Flame Imperishable. And what does this flame do, you may ask? Well, this is the term that the power that Eru had was known by, which was the power to create, and I mean truly create, not just alter or corrupt. This is what gave things life and gave them souls. And a little thing here, this is what Gandalf refers to in his speech on the bridge of Khazad-dum when fighting the Balrog, when he says, "I am the servant of the secret fire," with that secret fire being another name for the flame imperishable, meaning he is a servant of Eru, a servant of good to fight this servant of Melkor. But anyway, that is not really too relevant right now. So, during the beginning of time, Melkor had gone in search of this flame, as the thing that he truly desired was to rule and create himself. He wanted to be in charge. He wanted everything bent to his will, not someone else's. He basically just wants to be God. However, when he realized that this power was more a part of Eru as opposed to being an item, he knew that this was really a battle that he could not win. So all his time searching in the void had really been for nothing. Now, at this point, I could not exactly say that time would pass, but after Melkor failed with his plan for gaining the power to create, Eru would bring the Ainur together for an event called the Ainulindale. This would be when the music of the Ainur would come to be. Eru would teach each of them music and song, and together they would sing for Eru, creating the vision of Ilúvatar, which would be the vision of the world we would come to know. However, during their harmony of a song that would not be heard again, one spirit broke this harmony. He sung his own song. And you get no prizes for guessing who that was. Melkor. His song was so strong that some of the Ainur became confused as to what song that they should be singing, even beginning to sing his song over Eru's. So, a second song is sung by Eru. But again, Melkor goes against this new one too, and again this swings some of the Ainur to his song, not Eru's. So once again, for a third time, Eru sings a greater song, even trying to bring Melkor's song into his own now. But Melkor will still not back down. However, in the end, Eru sings his final powerful note to end the music. Eru addresses Melkor. He tells him that he created everything. Everything Melkor is came from him, so whatever he thought to do, Eru already knew. He could not overpower him. Melkor was furious with this, but hid it from all the others. This is then where the vision of Ilúvatar I previously mentioned gets shown to the Ainur by Eru, and the Ainur wish for this to be real once they have seen it. And so, Eru created Ea, and this term Ea is what everything that exists refers to, or in another way, the universe, which means you have Ea and the void, being the created universe and the timeless planes outside of it. So, with Ea now a thing, that meant that Arda was now in it, which is the name for the world as a whole. When the Ainur saw this, they wished to mould and help form it into a wonderful place for the children of Ilúvatar, except one again. And surprise, surprise, that one is Melkor yet again. He saw this world as not an opportunity to help and support the creation of Eru, but instead a world for him to control, a world for him to rule, a world of slaves to serve him as their ruler and god. Nonetheless, Melkor was still allowed to enter into Ea along with the other Ainur, with those who entered first being the most powerful and becoming those I listed before, known as the Valar, with then lesser spirits going too, which would become known as the Maiar, but they come slightly later. And you may wonder at this point, is Melkor still on his own though? Well, he has actually already turned many of the Maiar over to his ways. Some will openly support him in his thoughts, and others support him in secret under the face of serving a different Valar. So no, he was not alone. He was already building up a team behind him, meaning there was already a battle going on between the Valar, or Melkor against all of the others. After all, Melkor would not exactly hide his ideas now, even saying directly to Manwë's face, with Manwë being his brother, that he would rule this world as the most powerful amongst them all. At this time, Manwë would not fully understand the idea of evil and corruption, but knew that he and the others must prevent Melkor from ruining Ea as a beautiful and peaceful place. And this is where the wars of the Valar really begin. The Valar were trying to shape this clean slate of a planet and form it into something beautiful. However, everything they tried was countered to the opposite by Melkor, for what really appears to come from just pettiness and a want to do things his way. Melkor just simply wishes for nothing to be in the vision of the other Valar, and this went on for a time until the last of the Valar came to Ea, taking on his physical form, with this one being Tolkas, the most war-ready and champion of the Valar. And here, by the way, this whole idea of the Valar, their powers, and what taking these physical forms mean to them is a subject of its own really for a video. So if you would be interested in seeing that video get made, then please leave me a comment below of the Valar, just to show me that there is some interest in seeing this. But now, back to the Wars of the Valar. With Tolkas now entering this plane of existence, Melkor becomes more wary. For although Melkor is a more knowledgeable and powerful Valar in most respects, Tolkas is so physically powerful that Melkor is slightly taken aback. Therefore, at this time, Melkor is driven away and a period of peace is brought to the planet. Which means the rest of the Valar are now able to finish their wish of establishing the world of Arda. The world they ended up forming was a symmetrical one, where at its centre was the land that the Valar themselves chose to live, and this land was called Almaren. And upon this land the Valar created 2 great lamps to finally bring light to the world, with these being called Ilúin and Ormal. However, this light would not quite reach all corners of the planet, so some darkness remained, and within this darkness Melkor still dwelt, plotting his next move, moulding those he could to his ways and waiting for his moment to strike. He would not have to wait too long, for when the Valar came together for a feast of celebration at the completion of their task, Tolkas both married Nessa and then proceeded to drink far too much, becoming too merry and fall asleep. So, with Melkor's greatest threat now incapacitated, he knew the time to act was now. Melkor came out of the darkness, over the walls of night, and moved into the north where he would come to build his almighty fortress of Utumo. And for those of you who don't know, the walls of night were the outer walls of the world that surrounded Arda in the Elder Days. But anyway, as Tolkas slept for so long, Melkor was able to complete the building of Utumo, and due to this, evil gradually started to flow from its walls. Disease, death, and foul weather gives a hint to the other Valar that Melkor had indeed returned. Which one thing you also have to remember at this point is that the planet does not spin here. There are no seasons to speak of in Arda at this time, so for cold weather to appear is something purely of Melkor's corruption. The Valar knew that they need to find him and stop him before his evil could spread too far. However, before they could do anything, Melkor strikes first. The Valar are taken by surprise by this, and Melkor comes out on top. He destroys the 2 lamps, bringing complete darkness back to the world and claiming victory over the other Valar. It is said during his attack that it was so great that not only were the lamps destroyed, but also the land of Almaren along with them. And again, along with that, the entire symmetry of the planet got broken too. You may be wondering though, surely couldn't all the Valar together have overcome and attacked Melkor and won? Well, it's not quite as simple as that. Melkor had used such a great amount of his power to destroy everything that the Valar needed to use their powers to prevent the entire world from collapse, which left them really unable to have any remaining fight left in them to fight back against him. So, unable to pursue Melkor, but having stopped the end of their world and let it fall into ruin, the Valar now needed to find somewhere new to reside, and so this is where they chose a man across the sea, building Valinor upon its land. Now living in their new home of Valinor, the Valar need to establish a new form of light for the world. However, they do not build 2 lamps as they did before. Instead, this time they go for a different structure. This time they build 2 trees instead, one of gold and one of silver, and they are named Talperion and Lorelin. This angers Melkor, as it now meant he must defeat them all over again. However, Melkor was still not ready to launch an attack on the Valar once more, and with Tolkas this time awake, he was wary that they would rise up against him with their combined might. So instead, in these next years, Melkor would build another fortress, with this one called Angband, and this was located beneath Thangorodrim in the Iron Mountains in the north of Middle-earth. Here, Melkor would place a certain commander and his greatest servant that many of you may recognize, and he was called Sauron. So Melkor had now managed to build up an almighty army that consisted of evil creatures, including the likes of Balrogs, along with near unbreachable strongholds. This would not stop the Valar though, and they would launch an attack on Melkor, and this would fail, and the Valar would get pushed back to Valinor. Melkor would not sit idle in his victory though, and he would continue to delve deeper into the earth and build more to his great fortresses. He would also come to learn of the awakening of the elves at this time too. Melkor made it his mission to find them, which he did before any of the other Valar managed to themselves. He killed and captured so many of them, with this being the event that it is believed that caused the creation of the first orcs, which came as a result of the unimaginable twisting, torture, and then breeding forced upon them. It would not take too long before the Valar found the elves themselves though, as they feared that Melkor would capture, warp, and corrupt all of them, and so they came back at Melkor with furious anger. and this led to an event called the Battle of the Powers, also known as the War of the Gods. The Valar knew that this was the time to stop Melkor and his corruption over Middle-earth before it became too late to stop them, and so with their combined power and determination, they marched straight to Melkor and his forces. The Valar would unleash the power that would destroy Utummo and lead to the capture of Melkor himself. He was taken unchained by Ainur and sentenced to be imprisoned in the halls of Mandos indefinitely. However, the Valar did make a mistake here, for they did not push on to round up and wipe out all of the evil that Melkor had corrupted. Instead, they needed to recover. This meant that many of the evil creatures just went into hiding until their leader returned, and this even included Sauron. And so, for 3 ages Melkor remained in chains, and this was said to be around 2,900 years of equivalent time. After these many years, Melkor came to beg to Manwë for pardon. Although the thoughts of revenge were ever present in him, he pushed it aside to beg from his brother. Somehow Melkor was trusted here, at least to a certain degree, as Manwë granted Melkor what he asked. This was not a decision agreed with by all though, for the likes of Tolkas and Ulmo were very skeptical of this call. This meant that, despite the chains being removed, the Valar would not permit Melkor to leave their sight. However, this does not stop Melkor from making contact with the elves that lived here, as he already had a plan up his sleeve. This did not mean that the elves were all willing to listen to the words that came out of his mouth though. The group of the owls, known as the Vanyar, did not even humour him, as they did not possess an ounce of trust in this spirit. The Teleri were at the other end of the spectrum in that Melkor did not wish to waste his time with them, believing them to be too weak for his grand plans. However, the Noldor were just like that third bowl of porridge, just right. They had a greater wish for knowledge and skills, which meant their wishes were closer to that of Melkor's. And so, Melkor approached the one amongst them closest to himself, Fëanor. Another powerful reason for Melkor to approach Fëanor is that at this time, he was also creating the Silmarils, and Melkor desired these more greatly than anything else. Melkor would begin to weave his poisonous words into Fëanor's mind, spreading rumours of the coming of men, raising doubts about the true wishes of the Valar, trying to turn them to his side. However, Melkor could not keep his meddling quiet enough, as Fëanor began to realise that his lust was there for the Silmarils, and he rejected Melkor. And so, his words ended up reaching the ears of Tolkas, who decides at once that Melkor needs to be returned to his chains. He cannot be trusted, he cannot be left to roam free. Melkor had seen this coming, and he fled south before he could be confronted. Melkor travelled to a land known as Ilúvatar, southeast of Valinor, where he came across a dark creature who had once been allied to him, the spider-like spirit known as Ungoliant. Even though Ungoliant had previously rejected Melkor as his leader after he had been defeated, Melkor managed to convince Ungoliant to serve him once again with the offer of riches in return. Melkor wishes for both the Silmarils and to destroy what the Valar love, and so he uses Ungoliant for her ability to weave a cloak of shadow to hide them from the sight of the Valar. By this method, they manage to reach the 2 trees, and Melkor pierces them, draining them of their essence, with Ungoliant then drinking this sap to power herself. Once again, this leaves the world in darkness. In the confusion and the chaos that this creates, the two then travel north to Formenos, where Melkor steals the great jewels that are kept there, including the Silmarils. But not just this, Melkor also slays the first king of the Noldor, Finwë, as well. As the darkness still reigns over everything, Melkor and Ungoliant flee into Middle-earth by way of the icy passage known by the name of Halkorax, and by this route reach Melkor's stronghold of Angband. This is where a betrayal occurs, for Ungoliant wished to devour every single jewel to destroy all that they had taken. And although Melkor initially allows her to do this, he will not allow her to take the Silmarils as well. Melkor would struggle to defend himself though, For although Ungoliant was no Valar, all the evil acts that he had committed had taken great strength and energy from him, which had left him in a much weakened state. Whereas Ungoliant, she had been revitalized and swelled with power after drinking the sap of the trees, so she had become too much for even the greatest of the Valar in his current state. Ungoliant managed to trap Melkor in her webs and began to torture him up until the very close point of devouring him as well. However, Melkor screamed such terrible screams that it awoke the Balrogs that slept deep beneath Angband. These Balrogs, led by Gothmog the Lord of Balrogs, came to Melkor's rescue just in time and managed to drive Ungoliant away with their whips of fire. With Melkor now free of her webs and Ungoliant having ran far away, Melkor returns into Angband, and he would go on to create a great iron crown for himself that would house the 3 Silmarils that he had so greatly desired. Also, as an important point here, if we take a quick step backwards, when Melkor had stolen the great jewels in Formenos and killed Finwë, Fëanor had cursed Melkor, naming him now Morgoth, which is the name that he was only called by from that point onwards by any of the Eldar, as they believed his Valar name of Melkor was no longer worthy of him, so their created name of Morgoth was more suited. And so, that is now how I shall refer to him for the remainder of his story. Morgoth has now settled back in Middle-earth, to the north of Beleriand in his rebuilt fortress of Angband, and he comes to learn that the lands in the rest of Beleriand have come to be settled by the elves during his time in chains. This irks Melkor. He cannot accept that the elves are free. He believes that they should be under his control, that they should be his slaves. So of course, he cannot just let them live here without interference. This is where the Wars of Beleriand would come to be, and I will say here, I do have a more complete video on the battles of the Wars of Beleriand if you would like to check that out in greater detail, but I will run over Morgoth's involvement in this war in broader strokes here. So, Morgoth's first plan in what becomes the first battle of the war is to send out his armies of orcs and cut off the elves of Eleuthingol and the Sindar in Doriath from Círdan and the Teleri in the Falas, which he succeeds in doing. However, out from the opposite side, Thingol manages to send a request of help to Denethor and the Nandor in Osiriand, who comes to his aid with an army of his green elves. These reinforcements make it too much for the orcs of Morgoth, so they retreat, but they are then utterly defeated in their retreat by the dwarves that appear from the Blue Mountains after they tried to return to Angband. Despite that loss for Morgoth, he was finding more joy from his orcs that were still attacking Círdan though, keeping him trapped. Next we get to the second battle of Dagor Nuin Gileath, or Battle Under Stars, and the return of Fëanor in Morgoth's life. Fëanor had brought a force of elves from Aman, who were a far greater foe than those elves who had stayed in Middle-earth, and they marched all the way to Thangorodrim, with the orcs unable to match these elves. When Fëanor pushed on to the gates of Angband, he was separated from the main force by Morgoth's orcs. This is where Morgoth knew the time was right to send out his Balrogs led by Gothmog. Although Fëanor put up a fight, and I mean a good fight too, he suffered too many wounds and was struck down by Gothmog. So although the war was not really going his way at this point, the achievement of killing Fëanor was a softening factor to that. Then we have the Dagor Aglareb, or Glorious Battle. This third battle of the war involved the coming of Fingolfin to the war, like the second battle had with Fëanor. He had also come over the icy passage Halcarax, with a certain Galadriel alongside him, as opposed to taking the ships like Fëanor did. But the full reason for that being important is also one for another video, but let's just say it involves a kinslaying. So, now more Noldor have arrived, and Fingolfin has teamed up with Maethros, where they march in a great victory all the way up to the gates of Angband, trapping Melkor inside. This is where the siege of Angband begins by the elves. Despite their strength, the defense of Morgoth was far stronger. Morgoth was then stuck here for a great time, but he does not sit idly by and mope. No, he uses the extreme size of his underground realm to rebuild and improve. they are at a stalemate. But that is, until Morgoth regains his strength and finally, in time, sets forth his dragons. Which is what now leads on to battle number 4, the Dagor Bragolak, or Battle of Sudden Flame. Morgoth sent forth the population of Angband, led by Glaurung the Dragon and Gothmog Lord of Balrogs. He also sent forth great rivers of fire onto the fields for his forces of dragons, Balrogs, orcs and other evil creatures to take the fight to the elves. This well and truly broke the siege of Angband. The strength and timing of this attack meant that the elves stood no chance. Morgoth not only broke the siege, but also now too controlled a great amount of the north of Beleriand with it. However, something happens next that Morgoth does not predict. The elf Fingolfin, the High King of the Noldor, rides to the gates of Angband alone to challenge the great Valar Morgoth in single combat. Even if there was amount of fear of death within Morgoth, he would also never truly believe a small child of Ilúvatar could ever best him, a Valar. So he meets Fingolfin. And this duel was one of legend, and on a personal note here, one that I would love to see a live action or animated version of at some point. So give me a like on this video if you agree with that. But anyway, Fingolfin managed to deal 7 separate wounds to Morgoth as he was powered by anger at what Morgoth had done to his kin. However, Morgoth was still too much for him. After all, he is one of the Valar. Morgoth managed to knock him to the ground on 3 separate occasions, but Fingolfin would rise from each of these knockdowns. Nonetheless, eventually it would become too much for him, and Morgoth would bring him down by the use of Grond, his hammer weapon and shield. With Morgoth about to crush Fingolfin under his foot, Fingolfin got one final stab into Morgoth's foot, which is said to have left him with a limp for the rest of his time. Just before Morgoth could deliver the final life-ending blow, snapping Fingolfin's neck, he is saved by the intervention of Thorondor, the greatest of the Eagles of Manwë, who struck Morgoth's face and carried the body of Fingolfin away. There would be 16 years before the 5th battle in the war, but this was not 16 years of nothing. One of the legendary stories of Middle-earth took place during these years, and that was the quest of Beren and Lúthien. You had Beren of Beor's house in Doriath, and Lúthien Tinuviel, who was the daughter of Eleuthingol and Melian the Maya. They would wish for this Silmaril, as that was the only way Thingol would believe Beren was worthy of his daughter's hand in marriage. So, together they disguise themselves and enter into Angband. However, the disguise is not great enough to hide them from Morgoth, who is aware of their presence, but allows them to appear before him, curious as to what their plan may be. As Morgoth planned just what to do with Lúthien as she stood before him, he let her dance for him, and she managed to send him to sleep through the power of her song, very much something Morgoth did not predict. Beren then cut one of the Silmarils from Morgoth's crown as he lay there unconscious. However, the knife would break and stir Morgoth as the two then realised they must escape quick, which they managed to do, and this left Morgoth with just the remaining 2 Silmarils. Now a few more years on, Morgoth would reach the 5th battle of the Wars of Beleriand, the Nanaeth Anodiat, or the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. There are now men within Beleriand as well, and they choose now to try and team up to once and for all push Morgoth's evil out of their lands. However, Morgoth is no fool and is aware of their up-and-coming plan, and he too has brought men to his side, the ones known as Easterlings, which is basically just any of the men who lived to the east of the Blue Mountains during this time. Which means, for Morgoth's side, this gives them a great surprise attack from the side. Morgoth comes out the great winner of this battle of chaos and death, and any survivors on the side of good must flee to their remaining safe places, like that of the hidden city of Gondolin. And one man to mention from this battle though is that of Hurin, of who the stories of the children of Hurin are written after, for he is captured and taken alive back to Morgoth, who places him high upon Thangorodrim and curses him to watch his family, including of course his son Turin, who are also cursed and Eärendil is unable to do anything to help them and can only be forced to watch. There is also an elf to mention here too, a traitor elf called Maeglin. Thanks to the betrayal of Maeglin, Morgoth was able to discover the location of Gondolin, and so he laid siege to it, with Morgoth's forces being able to bring down this one last defense of the elves. This was not a flawless victory though, for Morgoth lost one of his mightiest servants of Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, by the hand of Ecthelion during this battle. And along with this too, another small group led by Glorfindel managed to escape, which would be so important in time as it included a certain 7-year-old child named Eärendil, son of Idril, daughter of King Turgon of Gondolin, who had fallen with Gondolin, and Tuor of the House of Hador and brother of Húrin, as we previously mentioned a minute ago. But we will get back to why in a moment. Morgoth now feels confident, for despite losing Gothmog and one of the Silmarils, he now controls basically all of Beleriand, and still has the likes of Sauron at his side too. He is not exactly in a powerless state. However, that small child Eärendil, some years later, believed to be when he was around 20 to 30 years old, went on an unheard of quest. He built a ship with the help of Círdan the shipwright, and he would name it Fingolfin, and he would take this ship and set sail for the land of a man. Now, for those of you who wonder what is so unheard of about this, it is that no man had ever set foot on this land. This land was for the divine spirits and the first children of Ilúvatar, no one else. However, with Eärendil being half-elf, this is likely what made it at least a little bit acceptable for him to take this path, as well as him also having his path guided by the light of the Silmaril that Beren had previously cut from Morgoth's crown, and along with this too, as he had taken this quest on behalf of both elves and men as a representative, and not just on a selfish quest just for himself like others would attempt to do in the future. So, Eärendil would appear in front of the Valar and begged them for their help. He says that without them Morgoth would win and everything would come under his control, willingly or as slaves. And so the Valar answer. They bring forth the host of the Valar, and that would include the likes of Valar, Vanyar and Noldor still in Valinor, and these would ride for Middle-earth. However, the Teleri would not join due to their feelings from the first kinslaying that I very briefly mentioned upon earlier, as they still felt too strong feelings against the Noldor for their actions. It is believed that some of the Valar themselves may have come too, but there are never any clear indications whether that is true or not, but you think if you're going to challenge Morgoth, you're gonna need a few Valar on your side. This is where the final battle of the Wars of Beleriand takes place, the War of Wrath, or the Great Battle. The numbers that took part were too vast to count, and when the smoke settled at the end of it all, the hosts of the West came out on top. Eärendil had killed the Great Dragon and Calagon the Black with the help of the Great Eagles. Nearly all the Balrogs were destroyed, and those that did survive hid themselves away far and deep. And the orcs stood no match themselves, so were basically all wiped out to the point that all Morgoth had left was Angband itself. However, with his power weakened too, and no defense left in front of him, this meant that the hosts made their way into the dungeons of Angband where Morgoth had hid himself, and they captured him. Morgoth knew he did not possess the strength to win this fight alone, so he attempted to negotiate for peace, but this time he was not humoured in any way. They hew his feet from his body, they cut the Silmarils from his crown, and once again that chain of Ungainor was to hold him as prisoner. This war had left Beleriand completely ruined and mostly sunk afterwards. The elves split themselves up either over Middle-earth to the east or back into Valinor. The men were given an island called Andor, later to be named Númenor, for their part in the fight against Morgoth. And the other men who fought with Morgoth ran as far east as they could. And then you also have the dwarves of the now ruined Nogod and Belegoth, who also had to find new homes too. But then as for Morgoth himself, while bound in his old chain, he was sent through the door of night, beyond the walls of the world and into the timeless void. Here, in this everlasting and ancient darkness, Morgoth would be left to simply exist, but not be able to fully influence anything. And this is where the known story of Morgoth comes to its end. However, it is thought that this may not be the end of him entirely. He was not killed, so somehow, some way there was a possibility that he could return. It is believed in prophecy that there would one day be one last battle, best known as the Dagor Dagorath, or the Battle of All Battles, which had been prophesied by Mandos. It is said that this event would bring the true end to Morgoth at the end of it all. It is worth noting that Christopher Tolkien claimed that from his notes, J.R.R. Tolkien had abandoned the idea of the Dagor Dagorath as a prophecy of Mandos, but it is still one many people know of. Regardless, it is said that Morgoth would be slain by Turin Turambar, the son of Húrin that Morgoth had cursed all that time before, but only after Morgoth had still managed to destroy nearly everything that existed, bringing the end to the world. That is when it is believed that a second Music of the Ainur would take place, this time without Melkor, and it would bring forth a new world free of evil and corruption. But really, who knows how that would really end up? Evil seems to always manage to rear its head one way or another, probably just through some other form. Or it becomes the idea of paradise, and in that new world, they just manage to live happily ever after. So there we have it, a look at the full story of the Dark Lord Melkor, later known as Morgoth. He is the one who is well considered as the big bad main enemy in all of Tolkien's works. After all, he is like the Lucifer of that world. He is a very interesting idea for a character too, as Eru claims that he knew Melkor's early thoughts. However, he did not intervene and stop him. Eru let Melkor go about his ways, corrupt all those things that he did, and did nothing about it. Very strange when you think that he was directly going against Eru's wishes. This could well hint though, that even though Melkor always wanted to show his power, rule over everything, bend everything to his will, he could never in a million years come close to Eru at all. Perhaps it comes back to that idea that no matter what, evil will appear, so if Eru knows about it, that's a safer thing than it somehow appearing from elsewhere. You don't really know. But there is one thing I do find quite sad about the story of Melkor though, and that is that we just don't get more detail of it. There are several instances where many years pass on by with nothing of note happening. There could be so much more from Tolkien's mind that sadly he never managed to put onto paper. Or it could just be that, actually as one of these divine spirits, time just means so little to him, so those long breaks of what appear as nothing happening is just perfectly normal to that kind of entity. It could be either way, but when you have an enemy like Melkor, you just want to hear more stories about it. But now that we have reached nearly the end of the video, I actually want to end all of this with a quote from the Children of Húrin's story, where Morgoth is talking to Húrin, as I feel this sums him up as a character quite nicely about how he felt towards the children of Ilúvatar and the world, with Húrin starting this quote. "Yet so it might be if they willed. For the Elder King shall not be dethroned while Arda endures."
"You say it,"
said Morgoth.
"I am the Elder King, Melkor, first and mightiest of all the Valar, who was before the world and made it. The shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love my thoughts shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death."
So on that very happy note, I hope you all enjoyed this video for today. But this now leads me onto my question for you all, and that is, do you prefer Melkor or Sauron as a big evil of Tolkien's works? Do you think Melkor being the original makes him the best? Or do you think that his disciple Sauron is in fact a better and more interesting evil instead? Please let me know all of your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section below. And now firstly, quickly to mention all of our other channels, including the new Batcave channel if you like your Batman content. Please check those out, as links will be in the description below. And also to shout out our patrons. Firstly, our Divine Power tier members of Kevin, Abram and Matt. You are all awesome. And a big thanks to our Fire Demon tier members of Nashith, Denversteel and Gregory. And as well, I cannot forget the Wizard Staff tier members of John, Andrew and Finrod Felagund as well. You are all true legends of the Bro Hirim. Finally, if you've managed to reach the very end of this video with me today, I really hope that you have enjoyed it, and I hope you will hit that like button, leave a comment, and hit that subscribe button too if you have not already, along with hitting that bell icon with it, so that you could be notified of all of our future uploads. So, thank you once again if you have managed to reach the very end with me, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.